WisconsinEye is partnering with the League of Wisconsin Municipalities to talk about an important issue in the Capitol, the dark store controversy. It plays out on two different ways that we're going to talk about, and I want to thank panelists. To my left, Senate President Roger Roth. He's a Republican from Appleton. He represents the 19th District. Senator Dewey Strobel from Cedarburg is a Republican that represents the 20th District. And Jerry Duchesne is Executive Director of the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. Gentlemen, thanks for coming in. It's a very important issue. Came close to passing something last session, didn't make it. It's a very complex issue. So Jerry, give us the 10,000-foot overview of the dark store issue in the Capitol, please.
Well, I'll give you a 10,000-foot overview of the issue, and then these gentlemen can talk about how it's playing out in the Capitol. But basically, this is two loopholes in Wisconsin property tax assessment law that is allowing large properties, particularly commercial properties, to have their assessments reduced well below what it cost them to build their buildings. What a common man would say, oh, that building is a $10 million building. No, these dark store loopholes allow them to get that assessment shaved in half or less. And the way assessment law works in Wisconsin, that tax burden just gets shifted to everybody else. It's an issue of fairness.
Did it grow out of the 2008 Supreme Court opinion? Is that the genesis here, Jerry?
Walgreens versus the City of Madison, absolutely. That's where it all started. That was a leasing case, but since it's morphed, leasing is a problem, but it's morphed into property that's owned by large retailers as well.
Okay, before we get to the senators, what's at stake? Because the league has provided a graphic here showing a potential shift of $187 million. Can you talk about that?
Sure. If you play this out, property tax assessment has to be uniform, right? Says so right in our Constitution. So if this loophole is not plugged, at some point in time, we will have to basically downsize the assessments of all major retail in Wisconsin, and that's then going to seep out into manufacturing. It's going to seep out into small retail. And before you know it, homeowners who are already paying 68% of the property tax bill will pick up 3/4 of it.
Okay. Senator Strobel, you have a master's degree, I think, in real estate. Can you talk about the Walgreens and the drugstores side of this, please?
Yeah, I certainly can. I'll just follow up a little bit on what Jerry talked about, too, about fairness. It is about fairness. And also what you alluded to, our state constitution says all properties will be assessed at fair market value. So how do you determine fair market value? Well, right now, due to some ambiguities that were found in our statutes that the Walgreens attorneys did a very good job of blowing up, they then found out that we aren't written tightly enough to deal with income to a property or leases, that actually isn't a bundle of what a property value consists of, that you can't look at that lease. Well, I say, how in the world do you expect to determine the value of an income property if you can't even consider income? And nobody is saying it's all about income. There's three approaches. There's income, there's cost, and there's market comparable. But right now, due to this decision, we can't even look at income in this situation, and therefore you cannot value an income property. You cannot determine the fair market value, which is required by our Constitution, if you can't look at the income of a property, and that's what we're up against right now.
And this graphic that you provided from the league shows examples from 7 different cities, and just Senator Roth, the Appleton, that's 1.9 million to 4.5. That would be a huge hit. Just talking about the Walgreens loophole, just in just that part of it, correct?
Absolutely. That's why when I look at this in Dewey, this is a tax fairness issue. That's why we got on board. That's why we're advocating for this. If you look at the Republican legislature since 2010, no one has done more with the help of the governor to lower property taxes in the state of Wisconsin. Over $3.5 billion over that stretch, saving the median home owner $3,000 per year in property taxes. So that's what we have done. This is us making sure that we don't undo that. This is us making sure that we don't see that tax shift going from commercial to residential property taxes. And that's why I was so enthusiastic to get on board with this bill. Particularly mine deals with the sales comparable side of it. Dewey's is with the income approach.
Yes. And
I just want to mention when Dewey's talking income approach, he's not talking about the income that the business generates. That's not what we're talking. We're talking about the income generated by the value of the property through rentals and leasing. On the sales comparison side of it, we just want to make sure that when you have a business, it could be the same, big box retailer. If right now they're saying they want to value their brand new building with the new location for the same rates that the dark distressed property that nobody's buying, that nobody's leasing, they want to equivocate those two as being equal. We're saying that's not the case. In fact, if you go to the Department of Revenue's assessment manual, they already say that you can't do what they are doing right now in the challenging of these assessments. We are trying to elevate that assessor's manual into state statute to make sure that there is some even playing field here as it relates to comparable property, which will result in fixing that tax shift.
Well, just a basic question. If a company buys a piece of land for $1 million and puts up a retail property, hotel, motel, big box store, and spends $4 million to build it, how can they then argue that their assessed value is less than half of that? What's the legal logic? I'm not an attorney.
Well, what they're saying is that 1 million plus 4 million is 5 million, but they're saying, we're paying an over market lease for, at least as far as the Walgreens thing, we're paying an over market lease rate on this building. Now, what is an over market lease rate? I mean, when you're talking these big national corporations, they know exactly what they're paying, and there's nobody who negotiates those rates better than them. So they're not paying an over market lease. But that's really kind of the crux of what they convinced the court in that Walgreens case. But really how it plays out, what you're seeing is that building that costs $5 million to build, they will come in and they will say it's actually worth $2.5 million because of this dark store legislation and so on. But then, quite frankly, the next day they can turn around and sell that building for $8 million. So you have, again, when we're looking at what's fair market value, that's what we have to adhere to. And due to this nuance that right now is out there because of the Walgreens case, we can't be doing that. And it's really throwing things way out of kilter. And I admire, of course, the governor for his pledge that our real estate taxes on the median price home are not any higher than they were in 2010.
Yep.
But with this shift going on, that's going to be harder and harder and harder to do, as Roger said.
And I just got off, this morning I checked with the Fiscal Bureau. Their projection is that in 2017 taxes levied, property taxes levied in 2017 paid in 18. Homeowners, residential property owners are paying 67%, 2/3 of the property tax. And that's up from, if you want to go back, I think it's up from 59% in 1980. So this is a dark store issue, growing controversy. Jerry?
Growing problem.
Growing problem.
And I echo the comments about the governor holding property taxes down. That's not true in the village of Manawa. And I know we'll talk about that a little later, but because of tax shifts, property taxpayers in Manawa are going to pay 12.5% more this year.
Well, I went to the new equalized values, which was just announced by the Department of Revenue for Manawa, which is a village in Waupaca County. What's the population?
Population 1,330.
In 1 year, this is from the Department of Revenue website, the valuation of all property, excluding, of course, personal property, dropped 25% in 1 year. It went from 86.9 million in 2017 to 65.2 in 2018. They lost 19.7 million in manufacturing value. So why is Manawa an example of this problem, Jerry?
Well, the owners of that particular property, and it was a big manufacturing facility, made dark store arguments. They threw a number of other arguments at the wall. And in the course of debate and negotiations, it was a negotiated settlement. They came out and won a $10 million reduction in the value of their building. And by the way, that totally wiped out an incremental value created by a TIF district. The city put in new streets and new utilities for that manufacturer, totally wiped out by this lawsuit and by this settlement. Downtown businesses are paying 12.5% more. It's local. There's sort of a myth in all of this that local governments are in this because we want more money. Local governments don't get a dime more when these taxes are shifted. It gets moved from one taxpayer to another taxpayer. And again, I agree with Senator Strobel. I don't fault these tax attorneys for finding the ambiguity. That's what you hire a tax attorney to do. But I think we as a state have an obligation that when we find leaks like this in our system, to plug those leaks.
And Senator Roth, you were mentioning that the city of Grand Chute. What's going on there? Town of Grand Chute.
Yeah,
Thank you.
The town of Grand Chute has an immense. If you've ever driven up to a Packer game and you're driving I-41, you're driving through Grand Chute. People a lot of times they think it's Appleton, but all that commercial, the mall, all that commercial real estate, that's in Grand Chute, and they are seeing this happen on a large scale. What the difference between Grand Chute and Manawa? Grand Chute is larger, so when they have these happen, they can better absorb it. The people who that doesn't mean that it's easy for them in the long scheme of things, but this is particularly devastating for your smaller communities like Manawa, who might only have one or two larger retailers or businesses like this. When they do it, it is absolutely devastating to their local economy.
Let's go back to Manawa. 25% loss of their tax base in 1 year, and what's that going to do to homeowners?
12.5% increase. In fact, they've already seen it. They got hit with that on this year's tax bills. So all of their effort to hold property tax bills down are gone because of tax shifting.
And here's another example of how this issue is so timely. I want to read the headline from last Friday's Eau Claire Leader Telegram. Shifting the tax burden. If plaintiffs win lawsuits over property tax assessments, taxpayers could see $561,000 on their tab. And when you read the story, 11 property owners, including 6 Quick Trips, filed lawsuits in July wanting to drop their value by more than half. So you can't get any more timely than this. Is this also happening in your district, sir?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And when we mention the small towns and villages and cities and so on, I mean, these are some big corporate entities coming forth with these challenges. It's expensive to deal with these in the courts, and that's just another burden that is kind of hidden in the process. To even defend this stuff is costing them lots and lots of money, and therefore oftentimes they just don't have the resources to defend. And again, this isn't about picking winners and losers. That's not the case at all. Again, it's about our Constitution and what's fair and how we determine the assessed values of properties. I'm not interested in winners and losers, and I'm certainly not someone who's interested in raising taxes, but I am interested in fairness, and that's what both these issues go to.
Ashwaubenon. Can you talk about Ashwaubenon a little bit, Jerry? What happened there? Do you remember? Otherwise, I'll go to West Allis.
I was about to say you caught me with a blank on
Okay.
Ashwaubenon.
Otherwise, West Allis sent out a postcard that said, big box retailers are now valued at $32.7 million. If they pay less in property taxes, that would shift $16 million to other taxpayers. Sorry to catch you by surprise on Ashwaubenon, but the point is that it's a growing trend across Wisconsin in all of your districts, R districts and D districts, correct?
It'll be a tsunami.
Yeah, a
And
tsunami.
We've seen it. You know, I've had my local communities reach out and talk with me over the last few years. Senator Strobel has seen it. And that's why we're bringing this legislation forward. We recognize that there is a problem happening right now. We recognize that more and more of that assessment normally paid by commercial entities is being shifted over to the residential property taxpayers. And that's why in our effort to keep those property tax bills low for the retired senior on a fixed income, for the working family that owns their house but they have fixed costs, that's our goal, is to keep those property taxes low. We can't do it if we don't fix this loophole, and that's really why we brought this legislation forward.
It has the potential to be a tsunami. That was your term, right, Senator Strobel?
Yes.
Well, let's back up the time frame a little bit. This session went home without doing anything. This is a big issue. You've seen such bipartisan support. Senator Harsdorf, Dana Walks, Kathy Bernier, Romaine Quinn, bipartisan support in both houses. Why no action?
I would change your phrasing there a little bit. We took an issue that nobody was talking about 2 years ago. And Senator Strobel, Rob Brooks, and myself were able to turn this into probably the largest, the most talked about issue, I think, in the Capitol building. And we were able to raise its awareness from nothing to something. And the difficulty that this issue has, we've been around talking to all of our members about this. It is assessment policy is complex. This guy's got a master's degree in it, he can tell you. And that's why for regular members who don't really understand the mechanics of how this works, it was very confusing. And that being said, we put together a legislative council study committee with the hope. It's got more legislative members on this committee than any other committee we have out there right now. The goal being that by bringing both sides to the table and talking about this, we can better educate members as to how the process of this works and how passing these bills will absolutely protect residential property taxpayers.
55 local governments, cities, towns, villages, and counties have passed resolutions calling for the legislature to act. So is momentum building, Senator?
I definitely believe so. I'm very confident that in this next session, we're going to have a greater understanding in the Capitol of this issue, and I think we're going to be able to do something productive in regards to this problem.
Who are you up against? Who's the biggest opponent here?
WMC has been a big person to overcome, or entity to overcome in this issue.
Okay.
It's special interests.
And other retailers too. And you know what, at the end of the day, I don't, like Dewey said earlier, I don't fault people for trying to pay as little tax as possible. I totally get that. It's residential, we all own houses here, I think. You don't want to pay more in property tax than you have to, you might challenge your assessment. So I totally understand why everybody's doing what they're doing. They can do what they're doing. That's why we need to come and fix this loophole to set again, the legislature must declare for assessors around Wisconsin what our intent is and how you value property. That's what passing these bills will do.
And now I want to read from the resolution passed by Manawa. The Republican-controlled Indiana legislature has on 2 occasions in the last 2 years overwhelmingly passed legislation prohibiting assessors from valuing new big box stores the same as nearby abandoned stores from a different market segment. Just one more sentence. The Michigan State House overwhelmingly passed similar legislation in May of 2016. Do your bills mirror the efforts in Indiana and Michigan, gentlemen?
I mean, we looked at bills that were all over the country when we were drafting these.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, our Constitution is set up a little differently, and I don't think we can draw exact parallels, but I think the end result is the same in what we're heading towards.
Excuse me, Jerry.
Senators Roth and Strobel and Representative Brooks spent, I believe it was 2 years, working on this legislation. And the way I would describe it is, first of all, this is a product that's unique to Wisconsin, the bills that they produced, but it's also an improvement over what Indiana did, and I think it's an improvement over what Michigan did as well.
Okay.
But every state, Senator Strobel hit it right, every state's laws are nuanced just a little differently.
Senator Strobel, let's dive into the bill that you offered that died. Senate Bill 291. How would it actually fix the Walgreens loophole, sir? Can you go back over that?
Sure, yeah. Let's say there's a Walgreens store, and oftentimes they're leased to the corporate entity, to Walgreens corporate, and they're built by a developer. And then oftentimes, once that store is up and running, the developer sells the real estate. Now, we're not talking, as Senator Ross said, the business. That's nothing to do with the business, but it's the stream of income, the revenue stream that comes from that building gets sold to an investor. And they don't care if it's a Walgreens or whatever it is. They care about the level of risk that is, and there's always a risk and return ratio that one is looked at here. But they buy the income stream for the next 20, 25 years, whatever the term of that lease is. And they will buy that property. A capitalization rate is applied to that income stream, and a value comes up. So that property could sell for $10 million, but then the very next day, Walgreens will come in and say, yeah, it sold for $10 million, but even though that was on the fair market, on the open market, an arm's length transaction, that is not the fair market value of that property. This is the fair market value, because you can't look at a sale which really its linchpin is based upon the income of that property, because income's off the table now because of the Walgreens decision. You can only look at really an existing store, and it can be vacant, and that's where we get into Senator Roth's bill. You know, that old CVS down in a neighborhood that isn't very successful anymore, that's been boarded up for 3 years. And that's and maybe that property, its highest and best use after that drugstore, will be a church or a go-kart track or who knows what. And that's what we're going to look at to the value of that property. Whereas these things sell every day, these Walgreens properties and other ones like it, for big multipliers of their income, but yet the income can't be a function of what their market value is. That's what this bill attempts to fix.
Before I ask Senator Roth about his bill, let me do a follow-up on what you just said. The uniformity clause says in Wisconsin that all property must be assessed uniformly. Now, our homes are assessed based on the arm's length transaction. So when the pharmacies, when the Walgreens enter into that, are they violating? Is there a question? I'm not a lawyer. Is there a question whether there's a problem with the uniformity clause?
I've always advocated that that's an issue here, that we have a uniformity clause issue, because, again, fair market value is supposed to determine our assessment. And to me, what's a better indicator of fair market value than an arm's length transaction? That Walgreens just sold,
Yes.
Let's look at its value. But our assessors, after that Walgreens just sold, they have to pretend that that never occurred and value that property in another manner. That's wrong.
It's wrong because it shifts potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes.
That's the end result.
Now talk about your bill and the actual details of it, sir.
My bill specifically deals with the term dark stores. It's when you have an entity, a business who often, they're operating in this part of the town, they shut this store, they go and they move over into this part of the town, and then they want new location. They want to assess the new store for what the old abandoned store is worth, and you can't do that. Location adds value. Plus, oftentimes they will put deed restrictions on this property, meaning that they don't want to compete with someone else coming in and doing the same thing at their old location, so they put in that deed restriction. This bill simply says it defines what dark and distressed property is, and it says that you can't use that when you're using that market comparison approach.
Okay, any PSs, Jerry?
Just on Senator Roth's bill, one of the absurdities down in Wauwatosa, we're arguing this one right now. National Lumberyard chain, I'll leave their name out of it, purchased a property for $9 million, put $7 million into a building on it. They're now arguing that the mere fact that they are there reduces that $9 million parcel of land to $3 million. Now, I grant you tax law can get confusing, but most people would look at that and go, huh? The location is still a
little bit
location.
of an Alice in Wonderland argument going on. Excuse me.
And that's what happens if they're able to use that quieter, perhaps less busy neighborhood that they chose to move out of. Okay, maybe the land would be worth $3 million over there, but it's over here on Burleigh Street where there's tens of thousands of cars going by every day. And that's what Senator Roth's bill tries to bring to an end.
I've got one Facebook question, but first I want to ask this. Are Wisconsin homeowners in your districts, are they beginning to understand the dark store concept and problems and loopholes and how it could raise indirectly their property taxes? Because the Eau Claire Leader Telegram story said this: if all 11 property owners won their lawsuit, it would add $18 at minimum to the property tax bill. Are homeowners beginning to understand? I mean, they're busy.
With every lawsuit, absolutely.
They are.
Yeah.
I believe they are. They're reading in their local papers that, store X, store Y, store Z is applying for a lower assessment, and those articles are very telling.
Okay, so we're carrying this on the League's Facebook, and we have this question. What can we do as local leaders and local residents to make sure a legislative fix is found? Thank you for whoever offered the question.
Well, we have a legislative study committee going on right now.
Are you optimistic they're going to come up with that?
I actually am. I really am. We need this. We need just an opportunity to sit down. A legislative study committee is a little different than a standing committee. They actually have more time. They've got really all year until we go back into session to just sort of unpack all of these different components, study them, analyze them, and then put these bills back together. So I am confident that they're going to come away with something here. And I'm hopeful that in this next session, just given the diligence that they're putting in there, this group of individuals will be able to offer legislation to the full committee here that we can introduce. As far as what people can do, I would tell them, my local communities right now, City of Appleton, Town of Grand Chute, and others, they are passing resolutions and sending them down to me. If you have, wherever you live in Wisconsin, you need to be emailing and calling your local, your legislators, your state representatives and state senators, tell them how important this is, and your local communities need to articulate exactly what happens with what's happening right in their own municipalities, the lawsuits that are happening, the tax shift that's going to happen. If they can articulate that and send it down to their leaders, I know that we'll be able to get the momentum to get this done.
Any PS on that, Senator?
I think Roger said it very well, and I think that the more this occurs, the more the shift is going to go to the have-nots, and that's just not right.
Jerry, come back to the question. Are more and more Wisconsin homeowners understanding the implications of the dark store shift potentially on their tax bill, the checks they write out either in December or twice a year.
They're starting to, and I'll use the sister-in-law test. Over the weekend, my wife's sister was asking her to explain dark store. So once you've kind of gotten down into that level, and she's a nurse, she's not a property owner, this is happening everywhere. People are reading about it in Eau Claire. We were up in Shawano last Thursday for a local government gathering, and this was the dominant topic of conversation. Even though most of the people there weren't from what you would call big retail communities, they see this, first of all, it's unfair, and people in Wisconsin hate unfairness. But second of all, they see it starting to creep into Shawano. Manawa certainly got hit hard. It's going to move into all parts of Wisconsin.
WMC has won a lot of victories in the last few years. Do you think they can stop your bills, senators?
I think in the end that common sense is going to prevail, and we're going to see some changes that are good for the state of Wisconsin.
You also optimistic, Senator?
I am optimistic. I mean, this is about fairness. That's the whole, it's about fairness in lowering residential property tax values. It's not about raising taxes on anyone as a whole. There won't be any more taxes being raised. We just want to make sure that there's that fair split between commercial property and residential.
Where's leaders on this? Because it was leaders that chose not to act on it last session. You're a leader. I mean, your fellow leaders were saying, we don't know enough about it. Didn't Senator Fitzgerald say that once?
Well, you know, at the end of the day, we didn't have enough support there to get this bill to the floor in the Senate, and I presume the same is true in the Assembly, and that's why we are where we are. We thought the best, again, we took this bill from nothing. We took this issue from something nobody was talking about to one of the primary issues before the legislature, and now we've got it in a good place in a Legis Council Study Committee. I'm hopeful that they'll, through their due diligence, they're going to put this in such a form and educate members in such a way that coming back this January we'll be much better off in getting this through.
Representative Brooks is in your district,
Yes.
and he had a chance to pass something at the end of the session, didn't he? Was there a compromise offered late in the session, Senator?
Well, I'm not sure of all the details. That was in the Assembly, but from my understanding of it, it wasn't a compromise. It was one of those deals in government where it looks like something got fixed, but it really didn't. And I give them all the credit in the world for saying, you know what, we're not going to do that. Because sometimes in government, when you fix something that makes it look like you fix it and you really didn't do it, then you really don't go back and fix it for real. And we're looking to fix this for real.
Is this your top priorities? Assuming you're back in January?
I've got lots of priorities, workforce development and others, but this is absolutely a big priority for us.
You?
It certainly is up there, but I've got other ones too.
If your party's back in control, is this an issue that you won't let the next session adjourn without acting on?
Well, if I had all the power, I would say absolutely yes. Unfortunately, I don't. We split power amongst 32 other senators. We've got a governor and assembly, so I can't make a lead pipe lock guarantee like that, but I will tell you that it is a priority for me and for all the other senators too, absolutely.
Okay.
And from our perspective,
is this your top priority?
This is one of two top priorities for us, yes. But I
Okay.
will tell you, I like our leadership. I like the people that are spearheading it. We're meeting with WMC last week. I had a debate with them. And one area we both agreed on was that this is becoming a cottage industry for tax lawyers. And anything that creates a cottage industry for tax lawyers, you know you just have to fix. So we're hopeful, but to Senator Roth's point, it's going to take a lot of local government people contacting their legislators and having good, thoughtful conversations with them.
Well, and I want to come back to the what's at stake. Let's say that for whatever reason, these bills do not pass. What's it look like for homeowners 5, 6, 7 years out, Jerry?
An 8.5% tax increase on average.
Just because of this and not because of other things like schools and tech colleges and counties and
All the work the legislature has done to keep property taxes from going up will be for naught, because this becomes an automatic tax increase.
Okay. Any closing PSs, Senator?
It's a big shift. It's a tax shift is what it is. Again, with levy limits, we have parameters, but it's a question of who pays what portion and is it fair or not.
I'm very proud of the work our legislature has done to keep property taxes low over the last 8 years. This is another piece in that puzzle to make sure that we can keep those property taxes lower for our seniors on fixed incomes, for those working families that have their house and can't afford through their budgets to have their property taxes going up. That's what we're fighting for: lower taxes, more prosperity and opportunity for all.
And I'm reminded of the stat from the Fiscal Bureau this morning. Homeowners, residential property owners, pay 67% of our property taxes this year. Thank you very much. I want to thank Senate President Roger Roth of Appleton, who represents the 19th District, Senator Dewey Strobel of Cedarburg, who represents the 20th District, and Jerry Deshane, Executive Director, League of Wisconsin Municipalities. Thank you so much. A very important issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.